I was halfway through making coffee when my phone buzzed. It wasn't unusual for my parents to message in the morning, but that day, the tone felt different even before I opened it. The notification preview showed only 5 words that changed everything. "We no longer trust you." At first, I thought it was some sort of mistake, maybe a missent message meant for someone else. But when I opened it fully and saw my name at the top, my hands started to tremble so hard I nearly dropped the mug. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced back to the last conversation we'd had, a polite, if distant, exchange about a family gathering I couldn't attend because of work. There was no argument, no warning, nothing that could have led to this. I scrolled upward, searching for context, for something that would explain how years of loyalty, sacrifice, and quiet obedience had come down to a single sentence of rejection. But there was nothing. Just that cold declaration. I typed 6 replies, questions, apologies, even a long, desperate explanation, but deleted everyone. None of them felt right. It was as if every word I'd ever used with them suddenly meant nothing. I sat down on the kitchen floor, the phone in my lap, and let the silence swallow me. My chest felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the space where my heart should be and replaced it with disbelief. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn their trust. I thought trust was built through sacrifice, through the late nights studying, through the jobs I took just to pay my share, through the endless compromises that always seemed to benefit everyone except me. But apparently none of that mattered anymore. One misunderstanding, one unspoken judgment, and it was gone. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. Maybe their account had been hacked. Maybe they meant something else entirely. Yet deep down I knew this was deliberate. The phrasing was too sharp, too precise. "We no longer trust you." Not, "We're disappointed." Not, "We need to talk." Trust, something I thought was sacred, had been withdrawn like a loan I'd failed to repay. As the seconds stretched, I realized they weren't going to call. There was no follow-up message, no explanation, just silence. It felt like being erased by the very people who gave me a name. I remembered being a child, always the one who followed rules while my brother broke them. I remembered defending them when others called them harsh. I remembered thinking that if I was good enough, one day they'd finally see me, really see me. And now they did, just not in the way I'd hoped. My throat tightened as I tried to breathe. I wanted to scream, to demand why, to remind them of everything I'd done, but all that came out was a small broken whisper. Why now? The question hung in the air unanswered. There was no one to hear it. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The coffee went cold. The world outside my window looked exactly the same, but mine had collapsed quietly inside 4 words and a period. I looked at the message again, almost expecting it to disappear, to undo itself like a cruel glitch. But it didn't. It stayed there, steady and cruel, glowing against the dim screen like an accusation carved in light. I wanted to call, but pride kept me frozen. A part of me feared what they might say if I did. Another part feared they wouldn't answer at all. So I just sat there, staring, until the sting turned into a dull ache, and the ache into a kind of numb clarity. If they could throw me away so easily, maybe I'd never truly belonged in the first place. I opened the message box to type a reply. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitating over every possible word, anger, grief, apology, but none of it mattered anymore. What do you say to the people who've just told you you're not worthy of their trust? I erased everything, took a deep breath, and finally typed just one word. Understood. I stared at it, my own reflection faintly visible in the phone's glass. There was no power in that word, not yet. It was small, almost pitiful, but it was also clean, final, unarguable. I hit send and watched as the message ticked into their inbox. Then I turned off my phone. In the silence that followed, I felt something shift inside me, a fracture forming between the person who used to beg for their approval and the one who was about to learn how to live without it. When I think back to my childhood, it always starts the same way. The sound of my mother's heels clicking against the kitchen floor, the smell of disinfectant and overcooked rice, and my father's voice echoing from his study, measured, controlled, never kind. Our house looked perfect from the outside. A white fence, a well-kept garden, a family that smiled in pictures. But behind the curtains, everything was about performance. I learned early that love wasn't freely given. It was earned. My parents believed affection made children weak, so instead of hugs, we got standards. Instead of comfort, we got expectations. I used to sit at the dining table doing homework long after everyone went to bed, just to hear my father say, "Good, that's how it should be." But he never looked up when he said it. His praise felt like a coin tossed toward a beggar, something to keep me going, not something meant to fill me. My brother, Adam, never had to try. He was the golden child, the one who made them laugh. He could spill milk, talk back, even fail a test, and somehow it became my fault. "Why didn't you remind him?" my mother would ask. "You're the responsible one." I used to nod and accept it, as if being responsible meant absorbing everyone's mistakes. I thought that was love, sacrificing myself for the peace of the family. I remember one summer when I was 12. I had spent weeks perfecting a painting for the school art fair, a sunrise over the sea. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be something they'd notice. When I showed it to my mother, she glanced at it once, then said, "Pretty. But don't you think you could have added more detail?" A few minutes later, Adam ran in holding a lopsided clay mug, and she beamed like he'd sculpted the Mona Lisa. "You're so creative," she said, kissing his forehead. I laughed it off, pretending it didn't sting. But that night I tore my painting in half. I learned to stay small, to speak gently, to please, to never make waves. If my father was quiet, I was quieter. If my mother was angry, I was her echo. It wasn't fear exactly, it was duty. I thought that if I could just be perfect long enough, they'd finally see me as more than a shadow behind my brother's light. When guests came over, I played the polite daughter, setting the table, refilling glasses, smiling through my mother's stories about how independent Adam was becoming. He'd sit there grinning, knowing exactly how much it burned. Once, after everyone left, he whispered, "They'll never talk about you like that." I wanted to hate him, but I couldn't. He wasn't cruel. He just lived in a world where everything came easy. The first time I saw my father truly smile was when Adam got into college. He shook his hand, slapped his back, poured a drink. When it was my turn a year later, with a scholarship no less, my father nodded once and said, "Good. Now don't lose focus." That was it. No celebration, no pride, just another invisible checkpoint I was expected to clear. Even as I grew older, I kept trying. Birthdays, holidays, quiet moments, each one a new chance to earn what I never got. I'd visit home with gifts, with stories from my job, with that same small hope that maybe this time they'd see me as enough. But they never did. My mother would ask about Adam before asking about me. My father would critique my choices, wondering why I hadn't done something more stable. Every compliment came with a condition, every kindness with a clause. Yet I stayed. I stayed because family meant loyalty, and loyalty meant endurance. I convinced myself they loved me in their own way, that they were just old-fashioned, that maybe love wasn't supposed to feel warm. It was supposed to be earned, proven, fought for. But now, looking back from the distance of that text message, the one that shattered what little illusion I had, I see it clearly. I was never their daughter in the way I thought I was. I was their proof. Proof they had raised a good one, a dependable one, a quiet one. I existed to balance their pride in Adam, to be the example that made them look like good parents. And the cruelest part, I believed that was enough. I believed that being the responsible one, the peacekeeper, would someday make them proud. But love that depends on perfection isn't love. It's control. When I finally understood that, years too late, I realized I hadn't lost their trust that morning. I'd never truly had it. It started with a phone call on a dull Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was halfway through preparing a work presentation when my mother's name flashed on my screen. Her tone was clipped, formal, the kind she used with strangers. "We need to talk about the bank account," she said. I froze. "What account?" I asked, genuinely confused. There was a pause, a sigh, and then the quiet venom in her words. "Don't play innocent." By the time she finished speaking, I could barely understand what had just happened. She claimed there was a withdrawal, several $1,000s, from the family trust account my late grandmother had left for future family emergencies. Apparently, the transaction was made under my online credentials. I felt my stomach drop. I hadn't touched that account in years. I didn't even know the password anymore. But the way she said it, as if the verdict had already been delivered, told me nothing I said would matter. I spent the next hour calling the bank, double-checking statements, trying to find any trace of what she was talking about. Nothing. Everything seemed intact. But before I could make sense of it, a message from Adam came through. "You should have just asked, you know." It wasn't that much. My heart pounded. I called him immediately, demanding to know what he meant. He laughed, a cold, deliberate sound. "Relax," he said. "I just told them you borrowed it for your car repairs." I didn't think they'd freak out this much. That was when it hit me. He had used the account, probably assuming no one would notice. And when our parents found out, he panicked and blamed me. I couldn't believe it. Adam, the golden boy, had crossed a line I thought even he wouldn't. I tried to explain to my parents, sending screenshots, transaction histories, everything I could find to prove my innocence. But logic didn't matter anymore. The moment he spoke, his version became truth. My father called that night. His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the disappointment behind every word. "I never thought you'd do something like this," he said. "After everything we've done for you." I wanted to scream that it wasn't me, that I would never steal from them, but my throat closed up. I felt like a child again, standing in that cold dining room, trying to earn belief that would never come. The next few days were a blur of silence and avoidance. My mother stopped answering my calls. Adam texted me once. "Maybe just apologize and move on. It'll be easier." I stared at the message for an hour, trembling. Apologize for something I didn't do. It was absurd, yet somehow it felt like the only way to restore some twisted version of peace. That's how it always was. I cleaned up his messes so the family could stay whole. But this time something inside me resisted. I couldn't let him erase my integrity. So I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. My father opened the door with that expressionless calm he used when he was furious. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed. I tried to hand them the printed statements, explaining step by step how the money couldn't have come from my login. My mother barely looked. "Adam wouldn't lie," she said flatly. My father nodded in agreement. "You've always been secretive with money," he added. That sentence shattered me. Secretive? I'd spent years sending them part of my salary when they needed it, helping pay Adam's loans when he lost his job. And now, suddenly, I was the one untrustworthy. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about loyalty. And I had lost mine by daring to defend myself. The argument that followed blurred into shouting, tears, slammed doors. My mother said she didn't recognize me anymore. My father said he needed time to think. I left with shaking hands and a raw throat, feeling like a ghost leaving its own house. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the walls. It wasn't just disbelief, it was humiliation, the kind that sits in your bones, whispering that no matter how right you are, it doesn't matter when people have already chosen their truth. I realized my parents didn't need evidence. They needed a villain, and I was convenient. When I finally lay down, my phone buzzed with one last message from Adam. "They'll come around once you stop being dramatic." I stared at those words, my chest hollow. Dramatic. That's what honesty became in this family, an inconvenience. In that moment, something quiet but irreversible shifted inside me. I stopped trying to make them understand. I stopped rehearsing explanations in my head. Instead, I began to wonder. If trust could be broken so easily, maybe it was never really there. Maybe what I'd called love all these years was just conditional allegiance, the kind that vanished the second it was tested. It wasn't the loss of their trust that broke me. It was realizing they never trusted me in the first place. Only the image of who they needed me to be. When their message came through, "We no longer trust you," I just stared at it. My phone screen glowed in the dark, the words sharp and final. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. I waited for the wave of panic to hit, for my fingers to rush and type back explanations, proof, or desperate pleas for them to believe me. But nothing came. Just stillness, the kind that settles after something inside you breaks quietly, without sound. I read the message again. And again. The sentence didn't even have punctuation. It felt deliberate, cold, like an invoice of disappointment. No, we're hurt. No, let's talk. Just a flat declaration. A verdict without trial. I realized with a strange clarity that I'd spent my whole life trying to argue for my worth in their courtroom. But this time there was no point. The jury had already left the room, so I typed just one word. Understood. No exclamation, no defense, no emotion. Just acknowledgement. It wasn't agreement, it was surrender. Not to them, but to reality. They didn't deserve an explanation, because they never listened when I tried to give one. They didn't deserve my truth, because they had already written their version. My thumb hovered over the send button for a few seconds. Then I pressed it. The message whooshed away like a final breath. I stared at the empty chat, watching the tiny gray checkmark appear. There was something haunting about how simple it looked, how an entire lifetime of loyalty could dissolve into one unread bubble of text. Silence followed. No typing indicator, no follow-up call. Just the void. I scrolled up through our old messages. Birthday wishes, reminders, tiny moments that once felt normal. My mother sending pictures of Adam's promotions. My father forwarding articles about financial responsibility. All the small, polite exchanges that had pretended to be love. And I realized I'd been living in that illusion for years. A strange calm came over me. Not peace exactly. More like exhaustion that had finally stopped pretending to be hope. I opened the family group chat where Adam was still joking about weekend plans and promotions. My last message there was from 2 weeks ago. Proud of you, Adam. No one had replied. I scrolled past the photos, the emojis, the moments where I'd tried to belong. Then I pressed and held the group name. A menu appeared. Leave group? I hesitated, my hand trembling. It wasn't just leaving a chat. It was stepping out of a role I'd played my entire life. The peacekeeper, the explainer, the one who always fixed what she didn't break. I pressed leave. The screen blinked. The group disappeared, and for the first time in my life, there was quiet. Not the oppressive kind that follows disappointment, but the kind that means no one else gets to speak for you anymore. I sat there in the dark, the blue light of my phone fading from my skin. A single tear slid down my cheek, but it wasn't from grief. It was from release. I wasn't angry. I wasn't sad. I was empty. A blank page after a burned story. I whispered the words out loud, to no one. Understood. Not as a reply this time, but as an ending. An acknowledgement that some bonds don't break. They reveal themselves for what they always were. In their eyes, I knew I had died that night. The dutiful daughter, the loyal sister. But what they didn't realize was that something else was being born in her place. Something quieter, stronger, and done being misunderstood. The day I packed my things, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than the boxes around me. There wasn't much to take. A few clothes, some worn books, the chipped mug my grandmother had once given me. I'd already stopped expecting calls, stopped checking messages. It felt like moving after a funeral. Only this time, the people I was mourning were still alive. I found a small apartment on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin, the heater rattled like an old memory, and the window overlooked a dull parking lot instead of a view. But it was mine. No judgments, no expectations, no cold stares. Just quiet. At night, though, that quiet felt unbearable. It was the kind that echoes back everything you've tried to bury. Every word left unsaid. Every moment you wished had gone differently. The first few weeks blurred together. Work was hard to focus on. Some days I sat at my desk, staring at the screen, replaying the last months over and over. The text, the betrayal, the silence. I wanted to hate them. But mostly, I just felt small. Like a child still waiting for her parents to turn around and say, "We were wrong." Come home. I cried more in those weeks than I had in years. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet kind. Tears that came without sound, as if my body had learned to grieve discreetly. Nights were the worst. The apartment would hum with the sound of old pipes and distant traffic, and I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had ended up being the villain in the story I'd spent my life trying to perfect. I started applying for new jobs, hoping the distraction would help. But rejections piled up. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. We'll keep your resume on file. Each message felt like another echo of my parents' words. We no longer trust you. After the 5th rejection, I stopped opening my inbox for a while. I felt stuck in an invisible loop, building walls around my own worth because everyone else had already done it. One evening, after another failed interview, I found myself at a small cafe I used to visit during college. I hadn't planned to go there. My feet just led me. The owner, Ms. Patel, still worked behind the counter. She was older now, hair streaked with silver, but her eyes had the same warmth they always did. When she saw me, her face lit up. "It's been years. You look tired, Beta," she said softly. "Sit. I'll make you something warm." She didn't ask what was wrong, didn't pry. Just placed a cup of chai in front of me and sat across the table. For a while, we just sat in silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. Eventually, I told her. Not everything, but enough. About the misunderstanding, the accusations, the loss of trust. When I finished, she nodded slowly. "You know," she said, stirring her tea. "Sometimes when people see you growing beyond their story, they call it betrayal. But it's not your job to stay small so they feel big." Her words sank into me like sunlight through a crack in winter. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone, anyone, to believe that I wasn't what they said I was. That I wasn't untrustworthy or dramatic or broken. I was just tired. Tired of proving myself to people who refused to see me. After that day, something in me shifted. It wasn't strength yet, more like the faint outline of it. I started waking up earlier, walking every morning before work, feeling the cold air bite my skin. It reminded me I was still here, still alive, still capable of rebuilding. I cleaned my apartment, hung up small fairy lights, and filled the empty shelves with secondhand books. Slowly, the space started feeling like a home, not a hiding place. On weekends, I wrote, not for anyone else, just for me. Small reflections, lists of things I wanted to learn, tiny goals. Cook a new recipe. Call someone who makes you laugh. It sounds simple, but those little victories stitched something back together inside me. Every so often, I'd get a message from Adam or my mother. Short, polite, meaningless things. "Hope you're well. Happy birthday." I'd read them, smile faintly, and put my phone away. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I no longer felt the need to. Silence, I realized, could be love too. Love for myself. By the 3rd month, the nights didn't feel as heavy. I still missed them sometimes, or maybe just the version of them I used to believe in. But now the tears came less often. In their place grew a quiet kind of resilience, one that didn't need approval or permission. I was starting over from ashes. Yes, but at least now the fire was mine. At first, I didn't set out to prove anything. I just wanted to survive. But survival, I soon learned, has its own rhythm, and mine began to sound like quiet determination. It started small, a notebook filled with goals I didn't tell anyone about. I wrote them like promises, not plans. Get certified. Start the business idea you shelved. Don't look back. My passion had always been design, not the glamorous kind you see on magazine covers, but the kind that tells stories through details. I'd once dreamed of starting my own studio, but life, responsibility, and fear had buried it. Now, with nothing left to lose, I started again. I pulled out my old laptop, cleared my dining table, and turned that little apartment into a workspace. The first few days were clumsy, long hours staring at blank screens, questioning every idea. But with every sketch, every failed attempt, I felt something inside me thawing. The world didn't make it easy. Rejection letters came faster than coffee refills. We've chosen another candidate. Your proposal doesn't align with our current needs. Each one hurt. But instead of breaking me, they built a kind of stubborn resilience. I started to expect failure and meet it head on. I told myself, they can underestimate me, but they won't outlast me. The days blurred into weeks. I worked through nights, fueled by cheap takeout and determination. The hum of my laptop became my lullaby. My apartment was still small, but it no longer felt like a cell. It was a cocoon. Every time doubt crept in, I'd remember that text. We no longer trust you. It still stung, but now it fueled me. I didn't need their trust anymore. I needed my own. There were tiny victories, quiet but significant. My first client, a local cafe that needed a rebrand, paid me less than minimum wage. But when the owner smiled at the final design, I felt richer than I ever had. I printed the payment receipt and pinned it above my desk, proof that I could build something from nothing. Months passed. My confidence grew in small, steady increments. I wasn't chasing validation now. I was creating momentum. My mornings began earlier. My nights ended later. I stopped counting the hours. Instead, I started counting lessons. Every setback became data, every failure a refinement. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if my parents had heard about my small successes, if Adam had mentioned my work in passing. The thought used to ache, but over time, it softened into indifference. I didn't crave their acknowledgement anymore. My life had become proof enough. There were still hard days, nights when exhaustion blurred into tears, when my doubts whispered, "You're doing all this for what?" But even on those days, I kept going, because for once, my progress wasn't about anyone else. It was about me reclaiming the pieces they had chipped away, my confidence, my worth, my peace. And somewhere between the long hours and quiet mornings, I noticed the change. I no longer woke up with heaviness in my chest. My reflection looked different, not happier, not yet, but stronger. My smile wasn't forced anymore. It was earned. People began to notice. A client referred another, then another. Soon, I was juggling more work than I expected. It wasn't fame or fortune, but it was stability, the kind built brick by brick. One evening, as I looked at my glowing laptop screen, surrounded by the quiet hum of the city, I realized I was no longer climbing to escape the past. I was climbing toward something new, something mine. The grief that had once chained me had become fuel. Every scar had turned into a map, and for the first time in years, I wasn't running from what broke me. I was building on it. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind where I didn't expect anything good to happen. My desk was cluttered with empty coffee cups and sketches, my inbox a graveyard of pending replies. Then, amid the noise, one email stood out. The subject line was short. "We'd like to feature your work." At first, I thought it was spam. I hovered over it, suspicious. But when I opened it, my breath caught. It was from a well-known design investor, someone whose company I used to idolize from afar. They'd seen my recent campaign for a local community project and wanted to highlight my work in their quarterly publication. My hands trembled as I reread the message. It wasn't just acknowledgement. It was validation, and it had my name on it. For years, I'd chased approval from people who never looked my way. Now strangers saw me, and they believed in what I could do. It was surreal. I sat there for a while, staring at the glowing screen, letting the words sink in. The air in the room felt different, lighter. For the first time in years, I felt seen. When the feature came out, it was a small paragraph, tucked in the middle of the magazine. But to me, it felt like a headline. My name, printed in bold letters, a rising designer with a fresh, empathetic vision. That single line carried more warmth than all the years of hollow compliments from my family combined. I tore out the page and pinned it beside my first payment receipt, a quiet shrine to the version of me that refused to give up. Soon after, opportunities began to trickle in. Collaboration requests, inquiries from small businesses, even a few messages from young designers asking for advice. I wasn't rich or famous, but I was respected, and that was something I never thought I'd earn on my own. One afternoon, as I walked through the small park near my apartment, I realized I was smiling, not because of success, but because I finally felt proud. It wasn't a grand moment with fireworks or applause. It was a quiet peace, a deep exhale. For so long, I'd equated pride with arrogance because that's how my parents framed it. But now I understood. Pride could be gentle, humble, and healing. Then came another surprise. A letter. Handwritten, addressed directly to me, not my company, not to whom it may concern. Just my name. It was from the investor who had discovered my work. Inside was a note of congratulations, along with an invitation to join an incubator program for emerging designers. My heart raced as I read it. I sat down on my couch, clutching the letter like it might disappear. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I laughed softly, disbelieving. All those nights I'd spent doubting myself. All those mornings I'd dragged my exhausted body back to work. They'd led here. Every rejection, every bruise, every whispered, "You're not enough," had carved the path to this moment. When I finally placed that letter on my desk, beside the feature article and the first receipt, I realized something profound. The validation I'd been chasing wasn't from others anymore. It was from myself. Every mark on that wall was proof that I could fall apart and still rebuild. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very people who told me I couldn't be trusted had no idea that their absence had forced me to trust myself, that their doubt had been the soil where I planted my strength. That night, as city lights flickered outside my window, I made myself a quiet promise. I wouldn't hide my wins out of fear or shame anymore. I had earned this, not through privilege, not through someone's approval, but through grit. It wasn't just a turning point in my career. It was a turning point in my soul. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer defined by what I'd lost, but by what I was becoming. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was wrapping up a client meeting when my old friend Mira's name flashed across the screen. We hadn't spoken in months, not since she'd quietly taken my side when everything fell apart. I hesitated, thumb hovering. Some part of me still braced for the kind of pain that used to follow any mention of home. But curiosity won. Her voice trembled with hesitation. "Have you heard about your family?" Those words alone made my chest tighten. "No," I said, trying to sound detached. She sighed. "Your dad's business. It's in trouble. There's talk of a fraud investigation, something about missing funds, and your brother's name keeps coming up." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Not out of shock, but from the strange mix of emotions that flooded in all at once. Disbelief, sadness, and something dangerously close to vindication. I sat down, gripping the edge of the table as if the world had tilted. I wanted to ask questions, but I couldn't find the right ones. So I just whispered, "Oh." That night I searched their names online, something I hadn't done in a long time. Headlines confirmed what Mira had said. Words like embezzlement, breach of trust, and family-owned firm under scrutiny glared back at me. My father's proud, stoic face was plastered beside my brother's in a grainy photo from a press conference. They both looked smaller than I remembered. The irony was cruel. The very son they'd trusted beyond question, the golden child who could do no wrong, was now being accused of everything I'd been blamed for. It should have made me feel triumphant, karma in its purest form, but instead I just felt hollow. I closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. For years I'd replayed that message. "We no longer trust you." Now the universe was answering it in its own way, yet the victory didn't feel sweet. It felt heavy. I remembered how my father used to boast about legacy and integrity, about how our family name means everything. He'd say it at every dinner, looking directly at me as though I were the one who might tarnish it. And my mother would nod, always silent, always watching me with quiet disappointment. Now, that same family name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The next morning, my inbox pinged again. Not from Mira this time, but from a local journalist. They'd found my contact through my professional page. "Would you be willing to comment on your family's current legal challenges?" They wrote. I stared at the email, my finger hovering over the delete key. I could have said a lot. I could have told them everything, but I didn't. Instead, I closed my laptop and went back to work. Later, as I brewed coffee, I caught my reflection in the window. There was no bitterness in my eyes, only distance. Maybe that was the real victory. Not that they were falling, but that I no longer needed to watch. Still, Part of me wondered if they thought of me now. Did my mother remember the message she'd sent? Did my father question his judgment? Did my brother, the architect of my downfall, finally understand what it felt like to be doubted? I'd never know, and for the first time I didn't need to. That night, I sat on my balcony, the city humming below. The air was cool and I wrapped myself in a blanket, staring at the distant skyline. I thought about how strange justice can be, how it doesn't always come with applause or revenge speeches. Sometimes it just unfolds quietly, like a slow sunrise you didn't expect to see. I took a deep breath and whispered into the night, I forgive you. Not for them, but for me. Because holding on to their betrayal had become too heavy, and I was finally strong enough to let it go. And yet, deep down, a small voice still asked, would they reach out now? Or would pride bury them before truth could? I didn't have the answer, but I knew this. Whatever came next, I would face it on my terms. It was a Sunday morning when my phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another client or a scam call. But something in my chest tightened. The area code was from my hometown. Against my better judgment, I answered, hello? For a moment, all I heard was silence, shaky breathing, like someone mustering the courage to speak. Then came a voice I hadn't heard in years. Sweetheart, it's your mother. I froze. The mug slipped slightly in my hand, hot coffee splashing over my fingers. But I didn't feel the burn. My heart was pounding too hard. Mom? I whispered, unsure if I was dreaming. Yes, she said softly. Her voice sounded older, thinner. Please don't hang up. We need to talk. Every instinct told me to end the call, but curiosity, or maybe the faint ache of old love, made me stay. We've been through a lot, she continued, her tone trembling. Your father's not well. The business is gone. Your brother, she paused, swallowing hard. He's disappeared. We don't know where he is. I didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then came the words that pierced deeper than I expected. You're the only one we can trust now, the world tilted. My breath caught. I wanted to laugh, not from humor, but disbelief. The only one you can trust. The very phrase that had once condemned me now hung in the air, reshaped into an apology too late to matter. Why are you calling me? I asked quietly. My voice didn't shake, though my hands did. Her answer came quickly, desperate. We need your help. The lawyers say there's a chance to recover something. Your father can't handle it alone. We don't have anyone else. A bitter smile tugged at my lips. You had someone once. I know, she whispered, and for the first time, I heard genuine remorse in her voice. We made a mistake. I made a mistake. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd imagined hearing those words, rehearsed what I'd say if they ever came crawling back. But now, standing in my quiet apartment with the city humming outside, I felt no triumph. Just exhaustion. Do you know what it felt like? I asked slowly. To be told your own family didn't trust you? To lose everything. Not because you did something wrong, but because you were convenient to blame? She didn't respond. I could hear her trying not to cry. I thought cutting me off would teach me something, I said, more to myself than to her. But it only taught me what real peace feels like, when the noise of judgment finally fades. Please, she murmured. Your father wants to speak to you. I hesitated. Then another voice came through, frail but familiar. I know I don't deserve this call, my father said. But I'm asking. As a man who's lost everything, can we at least talk? For a moment, I saw flashes of the man I used to look up to. The one who taught me to ride a bike, who used to pat my shoulder and say, "You make me proud," before those words disappeared forever. Now his voice sounded small, uncertain. I don't hate you, I said quietly, but I don't owe you my pain anymore. He inhaled shakily. Then maybe you can just listen. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to hang up, to preserve the fragile peace I'd built. But another part, the daughter who still remembered what love used to feel like, couldn't. So I said, I'm listening. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. It was as if time paused, letting both sides feel the weight of what had been lost. "Thank you," he whispered finally. "That's more than we deserve." When the call ended, I didn't cry. I just sat there, the phone still warm in my hand, my reflection staring back from the dark screen. They had come full circle. The same people who broke me were now reaching out, fragile and afraid. And for the first time, I wasn't the weak one. I was the one who had something they couldn't buy, couldn't control, couldn't define. Peace. But peace, I realized, comes with choices, and soon I would have to make mine. I chose the cafe carefully, a quiet, glass-walled place overlooking the city skyline. It wasn't ostentatious but refined, the kind of space where silence carried power. I arrived early, partly out of habit, partly to gather myself. My reflection in the window barely resembled the woman I used to be. Tailored suit, poised posture, calm eyes. Success hadn't made me arrogant, but it had given me something rarer, peace that didn't tremble. When they walked in, I knew they hadn't expected this version of me. My mother's eyes widened slightly, flickering between pride and guilt. My father hesitated before approaching, leaning heavier on his cane than I remembered. They looked smaller somehow, not physically, but emotionally, like people who had finally run out of excuses. "Thank you for meeting us," my father said, his voice polite but uneasy. I nodded. "Of course," I gestured for them to sit. The air between us felt charged, thick with unspoken years. My mother tried to smile. "You look wonderful," she said softly. "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "It's been a long few years." She looked down at her hands. "We know, and we're sorry." There it was, the word I'd fantasized about, but it landed differently than I'd imagined. I didn't feel vindicated, just quietly distant, as if her apology belonged to someone else. My father cleared his throat. "We're in trouble, you know that." "Your brother," I heard. I interrupted gently. "He took what wasn't his. Lied to people who trusted him. You believed him." He flinched. "We were blind." "No," I said calmly. "You were comfortable." "There's a difference." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. Years of buried emotion hung in the air, finally seen. My mother's lips trembled. "We were wrong," she whispered. "You didn't deserve what we said." "That message." I looked up, meeting her gaze. "You mean the one that said, 'We no longer trust you'?" She closed her eyes, tears welling. My father swallowed hard. "Yes," he said quietly. "That one," I nodded slowly. "I remember it clearly. I even saved the screenshot. Not because I wanted to hold a grudge, but because it reminded me of the exact moment I stopped trying to prove myself to people who had already made up their minds." Neither spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the espresso machine behind me. "I didn't respond to hurt you," I continued. "I said understood because I finally did. I understood that I didn't need to beg for belonging anymore. You said you didn't trust me, so I respected that. I stayed away." My father's eyes glistened. "We punished the wrong child." "You didn't punish," I said, my tone steady. "You revealed. That line hung between us. Not sharp, but true." My mother reached across the table, tentative. "Can we ever make this right?" I looked at her hand but didn't take it. "Maybe, but not by pretending it never happened." Her eyes filled again. "We've lost everything," I exhaled slowly. "I know. But sometimes, losing everything is the only way to see what mattered." For a moment, no one spoke. The city lights flickered behind us as the sun began to set, painting long shadows across the table. I saw my reflection mingling with theirs. 3 broken people, trying to find new ground between truth and regret. My father finally said, "You've done well for yourself." "Yes," I replied simply. "Because I stopped needing permission to exist." He nodded, defeated yet oddly peaceful. "You're stronger than any of us," I smiled faintly. "You just didn't see it when it mattered." I stood up, gathering my things. My movements were calm, unhurried. "I don't hold anger anymore," I said, meeting their eyes one last time. "But I also don't owe you the old version of me." They both stood too, unsure whether to hug me or let me go. I gave them a small, polite nod, an act of grace, not affection. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice cracked softly. "You really have changed." Without looking back, I said, "No, I just stopped apologizing for being myself." Outside, the air was cool against my skin. The city lights glowed like quiet applause. I took a deep breath, my heels clicking against the pavement. Each step, a punctuation mark on a chapter finally closing. Behind me, they stayed inside, two figures framed by glass, reflections of a past I no longer needed to reclaim. For years, I had waited for justice to look like revenge. Instead, it looked like calm, and that I realized was the loudest victory of all. They called again the next evening. I wasn't planning to answer. I'd already said what needed to be said, but something in me hesitated. Maybe it was closure. Maybe it was curiosity. Either way, I picked up. My mother's voice trembled. "Please don't hang up. We need to see you again, just to talk." There was a pause before I replied. "Talking is easy," I said quietly. "Listening is harder." We met at their home, the same house I once walked out of with a single suitcase and an unanswered ache in my chest. It looked smaller now. The garden that used to bloom with my mother's roses was overgrown, the paint chipped on the porch railing. Inside, the air felt heavy with ghosts. Memories of dinners gone wrong, of words that once tore through the air like glass. They were waiting in the living room, both standing when I entered. My father's cane rested beside him. My mother wrung her hands nervously. He spoke first. "We wanted to apologize. Properly this time, I didn't sit immediately. I just stood there watching them, the people I had once built my whole identity around." "I don't need apologies," I said softly. "I need understanding." My mother's eyes filled. "We understand now. We trusted the wrong person, and in doing so, we destroyed our family. We can't undo that, but please..." She stepped forward slightly. "We need you to know how sorry we are." Her words wavered, heavy with sincerity. For a second, I saw not the mother who judged me, but the woman who once stayed up all night when I was sick, who brushed my hair before school. It was strange, grief and empathy coexisting in the same breath. I finally sat. "I appreciate you saying that," I said quietly. "But trust isn't rebuilt by apology. It's rebuilt by consistency. By showing, not saying." My father nodded slowly. "You're right." His voice was low, almost ashamed. "We don't expect forgiveness overnight. We just want a chance to prove we've changed." I studied him, the once authoritative man who used to command every room, now deflated, humbled. I thought about the years I'd spent chasing approval, breaking myself into smaller pieces to fit their expectations. And now, for the first time, they were the ones seeking my permission to belong. "I spent a long time trying to make you proud," I said, my tone calm, measured. "But I realized pride means nothing if it costs you peace. I built a life without resentment. Please don't ask me to reopen wounds just to make you feel better." My mother wiped her tears, nodding. "I understand," I smiled faintly. "Do you?" She blinked, confused. "Understanding means accepting the distance that came from your choices," I explained. "It means not asking me to forget what shaped me. I forgive you, truly, but forgiveness doesn't mean returning to who I was." My father's eyes shone with tears. "You sound just like your mother used to, before life hardened her." She let out a shaky laugh through her crying. "She sounds stronger than I ever was." The three of us sat in silence for a long moment. The weight in the room shifted. No longer accusation or defense, but quiet reckoning. Finally, I said, "I hope you both heal." "I really do, but healing doesn't require my presence. It requires your honesty." My mother reached out, and this time, I took her hand. It was thin and trembling. "I love you," she whispered. "I know," I said softly. "And that's enough for now." I stood to leave. They didn't protest. There was no dramatic goodbye, no begging. Just the sound of old furniture creaking as I walked to the door. As I stepped outside, the evening sun spilled over the porch, golden, forgiving. I turned once, looking back at the home that had raised me and broken me. My parents stood in the doorway, small against the fading light. For years, I had wanted them to feel what I felt, the isolation, the silence, the ache of being unseen. But now, watching them crumble under the weight of their own remorse, I realized I didn't need revenge anymore. Grace had already done the job. The following week, their lawyer called, explaining the situation in precise, cautious tones. My parents' finances were tangled in lawsuits and unpaid debts. "They're asking if you'd be willing to step in," he said. "You have the experience. You could help them recover." I listened quietly, staring out my window at the city I had built my life in. Cars moved like slow silver veins along the road below. It was strange how peace could feel both heavy and light at once. "I can't," I said finally. "I wish them well. But I can't step back into something that almost destroyed me." He paused, then said softly, "They'll understand." When I ended the call, I felt no guilt, just clarity. Years ago, they had made their choice in a moment of misplaced certainty. "We no longer trust you," they'd said. And I, in my quiet heartbreak, had answered with one word: understood. Back then, that word meant surrender. The acceptance of exile, the collapse of everything I'd tried to hold together. But now, standing here in the home I'd built from ashes, it meant something entirely different. Understood had become my declaration of peace. It was no longer about being defeated. It was about choosing silence over noise, integrity over approval. A few days later, I visited their house one last time. I didn't go inside. I left an envelope at the door. Not money, not legal papers, just a letter. In it, I wrote, "I'm not helping to punish you. I'm stepping back to honor the boundary you once taught me. You showed me that trust is sacred, fragile, and not to be used as leverage. I've carried that lesson into everything I've built. You were my first heartbreak, but also my greatest teacher. I forgive you, but I won't return to the place where my voice was silenced. This is my peace. Your daughter." I sealed the letter and slipped it under the door. For a moment, I stood there listening. The faint sound of the wind against the old shutters, the quiet of a house that had once been full of noise and expectations. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply breathed. As I walked back to my car, the world around me felt startlingly alive. The sky was a soft gold, the kind that stretches endlessly before sunset. Children laughed down the street. Somewhere, someone was playing piano through an open window. Life was happening, beautifully, indifferently, endlessly. Driving away, I thought about that single word again. Understood. It had followed me through everything, whispered in loneliness, screamed in silence, carried through every late night and every small victory. But today it didn't sound like defeat. It sounded like freedom. My parents would have to face what they built, the consequences of choices made in pride and fear. And though part of me wished I could protect them from that pain, another part knew it wasn't mine to carry. Their redemption, if it ever came, had to be theirs alone. At a red light, I glanced at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm eyes, steady hands. For the first time, I saw not the girl who was rejected, but the woman who endured. I whispered almost to myself, "You did it." The light turned green. I drove on, the road stretching out like a promise. No tears, no music, no grand finale, just quiet justice unfolding in its own time. Behind me, the past dimmed like a fading echo. Ahead, the world opened wide, and somewhere deep inside, the word that once broke me rose again. Not as surrender, but as victory. Understood. Months passed quietly, not with the rush of victory, but with the steady rhythm of peace. My mornings began with sunlight spilling through wide windows, the soft hum of the city below, and the scent of coffee. Simple things that once felt unreachable. The chaos that used to live inside me had finally gone still. I didn't wake up with anger anymore. The ache that used to pulse beneath every breath had softened into something gentler. Gratitude, maybe. Not for what happened, but for what it taught me. Pain had stripped me bare. But from that emptiness, I had rebuilt something honest. I had started mentoring young women at a community center, those who felt unseen, unheard, or undeserving. Every time I looked into their uncertain eyes, I saw the ghost of who I once was, the girl who apologized for existing, who mistook silence for strength. I told them, you don't have to prove your worth to people who refuse to see it. You build it quietly until it shines on its own. Sometimes, after a long session, I'd linger by the windows overlooking the park, watching people pass, parents with children, students with notebooks, friends laughing too loudly. There was a time I would have looked at them and felt envy. Now I just felt connection. Life was happening everywhere, and for the first time in years, I was part of it. My small apartment had turned into something resembling a home, not perfect, but warm. There were books stacked unevenly on shelves, plants thriving despite my uneven care, and photos pinned to a corkboard. Some were of new friends, colleagues, the mentor who'd believed in me when no one else did. My chosen family. They didn't ask for explanations. They simply showed up. One evening, while closing my laptop after a long day, I found myself glancing at the old family group chat still archived on my phone. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The silence between us no longer hurt. It just was. And maybe that was enough. I went for a walk that night. The air was cool, the city alive with quiet sounds. Laughter spilling from a nearby cafe, a busker strumming a guitar under a flickering streetlight. I stood there listening, letting the music wrap around me. It wasn't sad or sweet. It was real. For so long I'd thought closure meant an apology, a reunion, or some dramatic redemption. But standing there, surrounded by strangers and sound, I realized something different. Closure isn't given. It's chosen. It's the moment you stop waiting for someone else to make sense of your story and start living it yourself. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need validation. I just needed to understand my worth, the kind that doesn't depend on approval or forgiveness. As I walked home, the city lights shimmered like 1,000 tiny affirmations. Every step forward felt like rewriting a sentence I once thought was permanent. The message that once shattered me, "We no longer trust you," had become a distant echo, a line from a story I no longer lived in. Because trust, I'd learned, begins within. And this time, I trusted myself. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the message came. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter while I was watering a small fern by the window, one that had nearly died 3 times, but somehow kept growing back. I didn't recognize the number at first. Then I saw the words and my breath caught. "We're sorry. We were wrong. We miss you." I stared at the screen for a long moment. The words blurred, not because I was crying, but because my eyes were still, and the world kept moving around them. For a second, I could almost feel that old ache trying to return, the one that used to live behind my ribs, waiting for any excuse to reopen. But it didn't. It couldn't. That version of me, the girl who'd begged to be believed, no longer existed. I sat down, the phone still in my hand, sunlight painting my kitchen gold. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just a strange, quiet gratitude. They had finally said the words I once prayed for, but the need for them had dissolved long ago. I realized I didn't need their apology to feel whole. I had already forgiven them in the silence that followed their absence. I thought about replying. Maybe something polite, maybe even something final. But then I remembered the first message. "We no longer trust you," the one that ended everything. And how my reply, a single word, "understood," had marked the beginning of everything else. So I unlocked the phone, read the apology one last time, and smiled, not out of cruelty, but peace. My thumb hovered for a second before I pressed delete. The message vanished, and with it, the last thread tethering me to who I used to be. I turned back to the fern by the window, its leaves catching the light. Growth wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow, almost invisible, but it was real. Every scar, every silence, every broken bond had become soil for something new. As I stepped outside, the wind brushed gently through my hair. The city sounded different now, not as noise, but as life. I walked without rush, without burden, knowing that closure didn't come in grand gestures or perfect apologies. It came in moments like this, when you could finally breathe without the past pressing on your chest. For years, I'd believed they took something from me when they said they no longer trusted me. But now I understood the truth. They hadn't taken anything. They had only revealed what I had to find for myself. They took my trust, but I found something stronger, myself.